All right. It looks like we are recording. How are you doing today, Lolo?
Fantastic. And you?
I'm doing quite well, Just trying to get used to the new setup around here and got the dog running around. Hello.
I was going to say, we
Um,
need to see your co host over
hey,
there.
buddy. How's it going? Can you say hi to the people? Hi, people.
I love
Hey, buddy. All right. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the end of the Book of Mosiah, the beginning of the Book of Alma. We're going through all sorts of fun little transition periods, and we're going to talk a little bit. Tucker, what's up, buddy? We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk a little bit about the Apostle Paul as well, and kind of do some connections with the Book of Mormon with another important character. Can
I
you
feel like
chill?
he's excited about Paul. I mean,
I
I
think
get it.
I think he might be excited about Paul, or he just really wants to play with his dinosaur toy. Um,
I mean, Paul does have that effect on us, I feel like.
I don't think I would say that about Paul, but all right. So let's just do a little bit of an overview of what happens in this section before we dive into the stuff with Paul. So from Mosiah 25, we get all these people all these stories that we've had of all these different groups. They're finally going to come together. So we've got the Mulekites that are already there in Zarahemla with Mosiah. We've got the people of Zenith following Limhi. They're going to arrive. They arrive. Then the people of Alma escaping from the land of Helam. They arrive, about 450 people or so, right? I'm assuming maybe some children. We had 450 as their number before. And they're all going to come into Zarahemla. They're accepted by King Mosiah, and they all join as Nephites. And then Alma, the elder, becomes the high priest of the church, which Mosiah somehow has the authority to give Alma the authority to become the high priest over the church.
Of course.
Mosiah passes an anti-persecution law against you can't persecute the church, which is not separating church and state. But hey, at least now the high priestship is with somebody else. Then we get the story of the sons of Mosiah and Alma the Younger going around persecuting the church.
Yeah.
And Alma the Younger is noted as being one of the sons of Alma. He's also the only named son of Alma the Elder.
We
Which
don't talk
is
about the others there.
we don't talk. I mean, I'm sure one of them then is Bruno. So
Nice.
And they end up getting converted, right? That's going to be ultimately the focus of our conversation when we really get into the meat here. They end up getting converted and become heads of the church or missionaries, really important missionaries for the church, right? So the sons of Mosiah, they all run off to preach the gospel among the Lamanites. Alma the Younger stays behind to become the successor as the high priest of the church when his dad dies. And this creates a power vacuum, right? So now Mosiah has no sons to confer the kingdom to. So who then should the throne go to? Well, one of the things that we talked a little bit about is that there are two other sons of Benjamin that are named besides Mosiah earlier in the story, right? So way back at the beginning of Mosiah, there were two other sons that were named. The Book of Mormon, in terms of the narrative structure, if the small plate or if the large plates are in any way, shape, or form aware of the small plates, then they know that there was a point where a brother who did not have any heirs handed the small plates over to another brother who would have heirs. And we're not going to get that same kind of treatment here because, possibly because Joseph Smith forgot that there were brothers of Mosiah.
I was
But so we're not going to, and it's not that Mosiah is old, right? Mosiah II is not old at this point in time. He's old enough, but he's not old. He's took the throne at the age of 30. He's been reigning for, maybe 20 years at this point in time. Like he's in his 50s.
So his brothers would still be around.
His brothers should still be around. And if he's the one who inherits the throne, he should be the oldest. So his brothers should be younger still. I don't know. Like there is somebody who should be able to take the throne in one of the other lines. And yet So, but instead, we're not going to pass the throne over that way. We're just going to
Right.
switch over to this democratic form of government, this Republican form of government with the judges. So we're doing a reverse Bible. Right? Bible goes from judges to kings. We're going to go from kings to judges.
And you discussed
And
how totally smooth that transition was with no wars or rumors of wars.
which is like it's remarkable
It's
to the nth degree that would happen.
yeah.
Uh, and remarkable is probably too soft of a term for it. This would be one of the greatest miracles of the Book of Mormon for
Yeah.
basically this transition of government to happen entirely peacefully, and like to not at any point afterwards apparently generate like the kingmen that arise who try to insert a king are making these like claims as like, oh, I'm just a guy, I think I'm super important, and so I
Yeah.
want to be king. And then these other people are like, no, guy, you're pretty cool, you should be our king, and all that. They're not doing it off of like, look, like Mosiah, as much as he tries to say that he like had the authority to do this, he did not.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm descended from the brother, I would be the one who's like the like they're not making the case that way in a way that would
Right.
actually like make sense. It's
It's
just
like I
I'm
can
some
do a
guy.
kick flip. I should be king.
Right. check out this sweet backflip I can do, right?
Exactly. And it's like, oh, what did you do this week? Well, I don't know. Monday I worked. Tuesday we completely reformed the government into a completely different thing. Wednesday I had meatloaf for lunch. That was a good day. Like what?
Yeah, it's very it's interesting. I like the positivity here, but it would be one of the greatest miracles of the Book of Mormon for this to happen this
Oh,
way.
yeah.
And it's not, like I said, it's not even that this transition of power happens at all that I find so puzzling. It is the fact that when we do have claims back to king, you know, to like we should be going back to kings or something like that. When those claims are made, this isn't invoked. Like this should be the case that there are
Yeah.
brothers, there are other heirs that would have been, and that does not get
Nope.
invoked in any way. And that's what I find puzzling and troubling, I suppose, about it is the way that those cases for kingmen get made down the road. That it really is
Yeah.
just some guy. Um,
With
at
the
least as far as
sweet
the text is
backflip.
indicating, right? So I mean, it could be too that like if this were historical, it could be that we're just going to erase the kingmen's claims from the record entirely, which does seem strange to me. But
Yeah.
okay, why put them in at all if you're just going to delete everything that was kind of like the
Right.
basis of why they were doing what they were doing? Like, did they have a case? Like, how did this affect? Like, why were they so influential? Was it just raw charisma, or and
Was there a
for
lineage or something?
if for a charismatic movement like early Mormonism, I could see charisma alone as a driver for establishing authority, being a really attractive idea,
Mm.
and that just being what gets manifested in the text. Uh, yeah, that makes sense of the text of what we have in the text to me, even though the story
Yeah.
itself is a bit troubling.
Oh,
Um,
agreed.
So let's see here. Um, we have the end of the Nephite kings at this point in time, right? So Mosiah the second is the last Nephite king, and
Hmm.
then he dies at the age of 63 after reigning for 33 years. Alma the elder dies at the age of 82, and Alma the younger becomes the first chief judge and also the high priest of the church. And he governs for a little bit. In the very first year, though, the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, there comes around this guy named Nehor.
Hmm.
And Nehor is one of the three antichrists, right? So we're getting now the second antichrist of the Book of Mormon.
Right.
And he is saying stuff that that Gideon doesn't like, right? Alma doesn't like either, but he comes later in the story. Gideon from the old Limhi days. What are you doing? Uh, Gideon from the Limhi days is joining our fight against Nehor. And because Nehor is a Book of Mormon Antichrist, he can't actually like substantiate his points in meaningful ways. He can't use his words to do that. So instead, they just get into trial by combat, and Gideon dies because Gideon is old. And
so I have a question.
Mhm.
When discussing antichrists in the biblical sense, they are often, they're going to be super charismatic. The multitudes are going to follow them. They're going to be so good with their words. They're going to lead millions away. And why? I guess not why, but that just seems the complete opposite of our buddy here.
So what you're talking about with like the idea of the biblical Antichrist is really more of an innovation of 20th century evangelicalism. It isn't in the Bible. It's an innovation that evangelicalism has produced in reading the Bible. So that is
Got it.
more the product of the Left Behind series than it is a product of anything that's in the Bible.
Kirk Cameron.
If only he were the only one to blame, but yes.
Right.
The movies are so bad. The books are not much better, honestly. But
I tried.
the books are at least a little bit better.
I just can't.
I got like 5 books into that series. And I'm like, it's been the same thing 5 times over. Like,
Yeah.
Tucker, what is it? Come here. He's whining now. I don't know if that's getting picked up on the mic, but
I'm not hearing it, so you're good.
Okay.
Would you like me to start
the whining of my dog while I record?
Would you like me to start whining as well? That helps. I'm good at it.
Yeah. So instead, like an antichrist is somebody who is in opposition to Christ, right? Like that.
Okay.
That's the idea. Is somebody who is in opposition to Jesus, and that is the idea of antichrist that gets communicated in the Book of Mormon. Is somebody who is it ranges from somebody who is like Sherem, who thinks that, there's not going to be this Jesus guy, but the law of Moses is super cool, but there's no Jesus guy, to
Right.
somebody like Korihor, who's like supposedly an atheist. There's no God. There's none of this is real, right? And then you get Nehor, who's somewhere in the middle, and there's no Jesus. The law of Moses ain't all that great either, but also like
right.
There's probably gods or whatever, but yeah, he's somewhere kind of in the middle of all that whole spectrum.
That's fair.
But again, because this is the Book of Mormon and he's an antichrist, he's not going to state his case very well, and it's just going to come down to some kind of sign. That's how these things get done in the Book of Mormon with antichrist. The most developed one, honestly, is Korihor, and when we get to Alma 30 and we talk about him in detail and how bad his arguments are, we'll get into like a really good case of how antichrists in the Book of Mormon are very, very narrow. So the death of Nehor leads to the first of the Kingman stories under the chief under the reign of the judges. And it's Amlisai who takes over the reign of the judges, who takes over the reign of like the Order of Nehors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he takes over that group, says he's going to be the king, and then tries to take over the judges basically the holding of the judges to become the head of the Nephite kingdom. Sorry, my dog was whining is a little bit distracting here. And Amlisai goes to war with the Nephite judgeship, and for whatever reason, Alma the Younger picks up the sword and goes into battle as well. And Alma the Younger ends up killing Amlisai, and the Amlicites run off into the woods to live with the Lamanites, and there are some more battles and all of that. Eventually, their group is stopped. This is another one of those cases, though, like we were talking about last week, of every time a Nephite contacts the Lamanites and basically tries to assert some kind of power and authority, they end up getting it. and the Lamanite culture just gets absorbed constantly into what the Nephites have going on. Okay, I think I know what the issue is. I'm gonna pause real quick, and I'm gonna fix the problem. So 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, Amosai's people end up like just heavily influencing Lamanite culture because there isn't really a Lamanite culture in any meaningful way. And I'm almost sorry for harping on this so much. It's just one of those apologetic points that's just stuck in my brain about because there wasn't good evidence or good citation on that point presented by the apologist. So I've had to try and reconstruct it, and I'm just not seeing what they're talking about. It's driving me nuts. Anyway,
Yeah.
Constantly we do see
I don't
that
think they see what they're seeing either.
Yeah. When in the case of Amosai and the Amosites, we see yet another case. Now, the Amosites do supposedly take on a certain aspect of Lamanitish culture when they mark themselves, but there is
Right.
still a distinguishing like separation between like the Amlicites and the Lamanites, despite the fact that the Amlicites are marking themselves. And yeah, it's a problematic section for a few different reasons. But anyway, once the Amlicites are ultimately defeated, pushed back, they're gonna be tomorrow's issue. They're gonna play a role in how Amalickiah ultimately ends up being able to take over. They also play a role in inciting the Lamanites down the road in going to destroy the city of Ammonihah in retaliation for the destruction or for the people of Ammon and all of that. It's weird. But they do play a role in all of that,
Right.
as well as the Amulonites, who, if you recall, Amulon is one of the leaders, or is the leader of the priests of Noah, who
That's right.
was
That's right.
the people of Alma. Yeah, so these groups do factor in later, and once Amalickiah rises up, they completely disappear. They no longer matter at that point in time, and
Just
the
like
order,
Mosiah's brothers.
yeah, the Order of Nehors will ultimately need to be replaced by the Gadian robbers, because we've effectively wiped out that whole idea from cognition, and so yeah, yeah.
You
And
know,
then
I honestly forgot about how they turn into, or how the Gadian robbers then come in to replace that. I mean,
yeah,
wow.
it's its own separate story, and it happens in its own separate book, but
Right.
yeah, that's effectively what they're doing in the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, then after the Amlicites are defeated, Alma decides that he is done with this whole being chief judge thing, which is probably good because the first few years were really crappy.
He had a rough go.
And um and there might be some allusions to like the first few years of like the American Republic and how in those first few years there were some rebellions and they had to get put down and Washington was doing all of that stuff. There could be some allusions in that, but if that's there, I think that it is purely as like Joseph's conception of how republics start, as opposed to it just being like something he's consciously thinking about putting in. But it could be something that influenced that particular section of the text. To answer part of Brian Hales's question of where do the words come from, that's something I think we have some explanatory power to that. Finally, at the end of those, Alma retires, passes the judgeship over to Nephihah, who is chief judge for a hot minute. And Alma goes around and starts his ministry. And when we get into stuff next week, we'll talk about Alma's ministry to the people of Gideon. And then we'll get into the city of Ammonihah. And then we'll loop back into all the fun stuff with the sons of Mosiah and all of that. And so I do find, even though the war chapters are supposed to be the more entertaining half of the Book of Alma, I honestly find the first half to be much easier to get through. I think it's a little bit more, it's just more, I find that the religious stuff in the Book of Mormon is more interesting than the Yeah, the war
wars
stuff,
and
all
rumors of
that.
wars.
Yeah, for whatever reason, that just ends up being easier to get through. I often got stuck as a kid. If I managed to get through Second Nephi, I would get stuck in Alma, trying to read through the
Every
Book of
time.
Mormon. Yeah,
Every single
and
time.
it would be right around that midpoint of Alma, right as we're getting into the war chapters. That would be,
Yeah.
yeah. So okay, we'll loop back into what I want to call the meat of this particular episode at this point, but just kind of, I guess, the preview for next week, we'll be getting into that stuff with Alma's ministry. Now, what I wanted to really get into is the similarities between the story of Alma the Younger and Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, and how these two accounts are very, 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 very similar. So let's talk a
You
little
don't
bit about
say.
Paul. So the problem with getting anything accurate about Paul's story, so a few things, I guess, with Paul. So Paul, we know, existed in history. There is
Right.
a small minority of biblical scholars who, and I mean, very, very small, who have put forward a fringe theory that Paul is a constructed figure. He's not an actual historical person. I find that one to be a very difficult sell. It's
Yeah.
interesting. They have an interesting idea there, but once you really look at any of like the data and the scholarship that really supports the idea of the historical Paul, it seems pretty clear that Paul is a historical figure.
Yeah.
Now, there are 13 epistles that are attributed to Paul in the New Testament. So Paul is one of our most prolific writers and has the most diverse set of writings attributed to him of all the New Testament writers.
Right.
Now, of those 13, only 7 are really confirmed as being the actual writings of Paul. The other
Really?
6 are either contested or they are out and out understood to be pseudepigrapha, writings of other people that are writing in the voice of Paul. A great example is Hebrews. Like, pretty much nobody accepts Hebrews as being the writings of Paul. It's just too different from everything else, presents a different theology. It knows things that Paul wouldn't have been aware of. It's not an epistle that lines, the writing style is completely different.
Right.
It doesn't match Paul in any meaningful way. And so Hebrews is understood pretty much universally to be written by somebody other than Paul. I think to the point that it's even in one of the footnotes in the LDS edition of the scriptures, if I'm recalling correctly. I did not check that particular note, but if I recall, my introduction to the idea that Paul did not write Hebrews was when I was on my mission and I was reading through the scriptures in more detail. And so it's fine, right? Because you can still accept it as scripture, even if it's not written by Paul, because it's really just tradition that ascribes it to him, and that's fine. So we do have very good reason to believe that Paul existed in history because of that. And because of his own writings, there are certain things that we actually know about the historical Paul. And then because of some other information, we have good indication about stuff that was going on with the historical Paul. So for one, the historical Paul, based off of his own writings, had a whole lot of conflict with the Jerusalem church. He was big in like the Greco-Roman scene of Christianity in the diaspora.
Really?
But he had some big conflicts with the church in Jerusalem. To the point that there is a decent amount of evidence that Paul may have been called into Jerusalem for something like a disciplinary hearing. So that would be the equivalent of a disciplinary hearing. Like there is some drama with Paul and the Jerusalem
just got
church.
Way more interesting to me.
Right. Paul is fascinating for a few different reasons. The thing is, though, that he dies a bit too early, if I recall, for knowing about the destruction in Jerusalem. So the temple is destroyed in Jerusalem in 70 CE, and along with the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, is the destruction of Jerusalem-based Christianity. It's really at that time that Jerusalem Christianity goes the way of the dodo, and any of those traditions that were really developing as Jerusalem Christianity die at that point. And they don't leave any writings behind. We don't have like anything written by James, the brother of Jesus, who was the head of the Jerusalem church. We don't have anything written by Peter, even though there's those epistles that are ascribed to Peter. Peter wasn't literate. He was a fisherman from Galilee. Like, the man would not have been able to write, and let alone being able to write in Greek, which is what a lot of pretty much all the New Testament writings are in Greek. And like, this is actually an issue for a lot of what we attribute to as like New Testament scholarship. Matthew was not written by the apostle Matthew, even though there is that tradition that that's who it was written by. Again, he's a tax collector in friggin' Galilee, right? Like first century Galilee. Like, he did not need to be able to read to do that job. And so he did not need to be able to write to do that job. And so he is not, like, the chances that he is literate, especially to the sophisticated level of Greek that the Gospel of Matthew is written in, is it's effectively impossible, right? This is how scholarship has gone through and dealt with a lot of those issues. But Paul is unique in that, because we have his writings, we know that he was capable of doing so, for for one. But for two, because he writes these things down in his epistles, because he's writing these ideas down, these are the ideas that persist after the deaths of like the first generation of early Christianity. But Paul's ideas are steeped in that first generation. Paul, like, this is all really, really fascinating stuff about Paul and how he ends up really basically creating what we know as modern Christianity. And
that is super cool.
Like, diving into the scholarship with like Bart Ehrman, Dan McClellan, James Tabor, like these Elaine Pagels, I think, even cover some of this. Like, there are a bunch of scholars who will be happy, who've written books on Paul and like the early influence of Paul, the conflicts with the Gnostics, and how like that kind of helps to shape some of these ideas, and how that leads into the creation of the Gospels, how the different gospel accounts conflict with each other to build, and the ones that ultimately build on Pauline Christianity become the orthodoxy. The ones that oppose Pauline Christianity become heresies, and those are the ones that get kicked out.
So I guess history isn't written by the victors; it's written by the literate.
It's written by the literate, and it's written by the people, sometimes the ones who just survive. And sometimes survival means being able to put your words down long enough that they outlast you. And there's a tradition in early Christianity that the words of Jesus as spoken by the disciples are what has the authority. And so in early tradition, if you could actually hear the voices and hear what's being spoken, that's what has authority. But as those people die off, you can't hear those words anymore. And so what gets left behind are these written documents, and those written documents are what starts to become the authority. That's what starts to become, and so that's how you start to get this evolved tradition, and why the only writings that are happening in the 30s and the 40s are Pauline writings. They're not gospel writings. There are no gospels that are written before the destruction of the temple, with the possible exception of Mark. But I think any date that puts Mark before 70 CE is overly aggressive. Mark, now Mark is the first gospel that gets written. Matthew and Luke are written at roughly the same time, probably, and then John is the last one that's written, probably. Those dates get a little bit murkier, but Matthew and Luke are probably written at roughly the same time. They're both using Mark as a source. They're both aware of Mark, and they don't seem to be as aware of each other. But they do quote similar things that are not in Mark. And so there is this proposed Q source, because they're quoting the same thing. It's not in Mark, but they're both quoting it. They're not necessarily aware of each other. And this is part of what's led to this idea of like, there's this Q source, which comes from like a German word. I don't remember what it is, that informs that. Okay. That was the crash course in New Testament scholarship to get into Luke. And the reason why we're mentioning Luke is because the author of Luke and the author of Acts purports to be the same author. And this author is writing after the death of Paul, and probably did not know Paul. But interestingly enough, may also not have been aware of the Pauline epistles, which were not really circulated around. Really? They weren't taken outside of the church context where they were written to until like the early 2nd century. And so if those letters aren't going around, and the writer, this author of Luke Acts, is writing about Paul without taking into account Paul's own writings on the subject. What's their source? How are they establishing this story about Paul? And I can't really find a very solid answer on that. I am sure that there is more. If I were to actually go through a seminary training or something like that, I'm sure I would know much more on that particular subject. But as far as I can tell, there really isn't a good indication of a source for where they're getting their information about Paul, apart from traditions about him,
Right.
which is fine because there are some details, some superficial details that they get correct, which does indicate that they may have known things about Paul that are historically accurate. But then there are things where they do differ quite a bit internally, but also with some of the stuff that Paul says himself. Or they make claims that Paul, as far as our writings are concerned, the writings of Paul that we have are concerned, that Paul never actually talks about. So in Acts chapter 8, we finally get introduced to this character of Saul. And there's been the death of Stephen, who was the first Christian martyr. And Saul is there, just egging on the vote. And it says that it says that he made havoc of the church in verse 3 of chapter 8. Okay. I know why you're kind of wowing there, because we're leading into something.
I'm excited. No spoilers.
So Paul is creating trouble, right? And then he, in chapter 9, starts breathing out threatenings against the disciples. He starts breathing out threatenings against the church, and he's going to go to Damascus to persecute some members of the church that are out there. And as he's journeying, suddenly there shines a light round about him. This is Acts 9 verse 3. It says, this light shined round about him, a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and he heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Now, Paul is actually able to talk here. Saul's able to talk here. He says, who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks, which is just, that's a great line. That's a great line.
I was it's a good one.
And he, Paul, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me do? And the Lord said unto him, arise and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. We're not going to dive too terribly deep into that, but do remember that, because it's interesting that there is a discrepancy there. And Saul rose from the earth, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no man, but they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and neither did eat nor drink. And eventually his sight is healed, and he becomes converted and becomes one of the great leaders of early Christianity. In Acts 22, we have Paul supposedly telling this story to other people, and he says that let's see. So here in verse 6, so 22:6, and it came to pass. There's that phrase. That as I made my journey and was come nigh.
Never heard that before.
Right. Come nigh unto Damascus about noon. Suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. It's interesting that it's just similar phrasing to earlier. Which is, that's good.
Almost like it was written by the same person.
Right. Instead of being written by Paul. Right. So this is one of the things too. So this is supposedly Paul recording his account in the first person.
Right.
And I'm not convinced this is actually Paul's words. But I don't know where Acts 22 would have come from. I tried to dive into some of that and to figure out where this would have come from, what would have been a source for it.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Never mind then.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. I think it's fascinating, but I don't really know where this would have come from. And so I fell to the ground, heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light and were afraid. Okay, so they see the light, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. So back to Acts 9. The men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. They heard not the voice. They saw the light. Yeah, so this is one of those things that gets pointed out as a Bible contradiction for very good reason, because it is.
I was going to say, because that is exactly what it is.
And then Paul asks what he should do, and then he's told where he should go. Okay. The story gets told one more time. And I just want to touch on this because it's important for understanding like the kind of the full breadth of what we're getting into with Alma the Younger. Okay. So in Acts 26, Paul is giving a little bit more of a background, and he says that many of the saints that I shut up in prison, this is verse 10, many of the saints I shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priests, and when they were put to death, I gave my voice against them. All right, so he is basically claiming to be involved or to giving assent to the martyring of Christians. I punished them often in every synagogue, compelled them to blaspheme, and I went to Damascus with authority from the high priest. I saw the light from heaven above the brightness of the sun, shining round about me, and them which journeyed with me. Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for you to kick against the pricks. Who art thou, Lord? I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. Right? So we get all that same stuff again. And anyway, so for one, I do find the similarity of verbiage to other things to be quite fascinating.
Compelling,
like the pillars of, or the light descending from heaven above the brightness of the sun. Yeah. Shining round about me.
I like the reoccurrence of the prick thing. That was nice.
I do like that one too. It's hard for you to kick against the pricks. That's yeah, it's great. I think it's a Natasha Helfer thing as well to be to refer to that phrase.
Yeah.
I think that was the basis of her patriarchal pricks comment. Anyway. So in Galatians, we have Paul actually writing a little bit about his conversion experience. I want to be very clear that if I wasn't already, that in Paul's own epistles, in his own writing, he does not recount this story in any actual real detail.
Right.
Galatians 1 is one of those cases where he gets into it a little bit, where he says that I certify you, brethren, the gospel which has been preached to me is not after man, for I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my conversation in time past in the Jews' religion, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God and wasted it. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, to reveal his son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen, immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood. Neither went I up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before, and this is getting a little bit to his conflict, but I went to Arabia and returned again in Damascus. So yeah, basically Paul is separating himself from the apostles, from the disciples, right? Like he's separating himself from the rest of the body of like Christianity and saying that no, I wasn't converted by them. I was converted by like a manifestation of Jesus. That's right. He's like, I did the bad stuff. I got the revelation of the Son of God. And that's really what he gets into in his own writings. And that happens multiple times in other sections of his own epistles, but never to the extent, to the detail that Acts gets into, which again, Acts is written by somebody who's not aware of the Pauline epistles and somebody who probably didn't know Paul at all, despite the fact that the tradition holds that the author of Luke Acts was a physician who traveled with Paul. It just, it's not aware of certain things. Okay. That is Paul. Are we clear on Paul?
Yes.
We have all the details lined up. All right. Let's go to Mosiah.
Love it.
So we're going to have, we have the story of the sons of Mosiah. They're outnumbered among the unbelievers. We'll start here with verse 8. And also one of the sons of Alma was numbered among them, he being called Alma after his father. He was a wicked and idolatrous man. man of many words. He did speak much flattery, led many of the people to do after the manner of his iniquities, stealing away the hearts of the people. He became a great hinderment to the prosperity of the church of God, and gave power to the enemy of God, or gave a chance for the enemy of God to exercise power over them. He was going about to destroy the church of God. He go about secretly with the sons of Mosiah. And as they were going about rebelling against God, the angel of the Lord appeared unto them, descended as it were in a cloud. He spake as it were with the voice of thunder, which caused the earth to shake where they stood. So great was their astonishment, they fell to the earth and understood not the words which he spake unto them. Nevertheless, he cried again, saying, Alma, arise and stand forth, for why persecutest thou the church of God? Does that sound familiar?
I'm trying to place it. Yes. Word for word.
It
Yes.
is there. It is the arise and stand forth. Why persecutest thou me? Like Jesus says, but persecutest why that, like the order of words might be a little bit different here, but these are the same words.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, Brian Hales, about where the words come from, well, I think we showed that here. Then the angel said, Behold, the Lord hath heard the prayers of his people, the prayers of his servant, Alma, who is thy father. The angel's going to be a little bit more detailed than Jesus did. He has more time available to talk to people. He has prayed with much faith concerning thee, that thou mightest be brought to the knowledge of the truth. Therefore, for this purpose
have free time on his hands.
For this purpose have I come to convince thee of the power and authority of God, that the prayers of his servants might be answered according to their faith. Can you dispute the power of God? Doth my voice not shake the earth? Can you not also behold me before you? I am sent from God. Now I say unto thee, go and remember the captivity of thy fathers in the land of Helam and in the land of Nephi, and remember how great things he has done for them. They were in bondage, and he has delivered them. And I say unto thee, Alma, go thy way and seek to destroy the church no more. Thy prayers will be answered, and this even if thou wilt of thyself be cast off. Came to pass these last words the angel spake unto Alma, and he departed. He's like, whoosh! And Alma and those that were with him fell again to the earth, for great was their astonishment. For with their own eyes they had beheld the angel of the Lord, and his voice was as thunder, which shook the earth. And they knew that there was nothing save the power of God that could shake the earth, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's pause there for 1 second. We're going to jump over to Alma's own version of this story.
Yes.
Okay. So we got the angel appearing, right? And when Alma talks about this, okay, sorry, real quick. Remember what we read in Galatians?
Yeah.
You remember how I said how I really liked? I had my mission scripture came from this
Oh,
section. Remember
yeah.
we talked about that afterwards? Yeah. So my mission section comes from Alma 36, and we're gonna read my mission plaque scripture here real quick. I would not that you think that I know of myself, not of the temporal, but of the spiritual, not of the carnal mind, but of God. Now behold, I say unto you, if I had not been born of God, I should not have known these things. But God has, by the mouth of his holy angel, made these things known unto me, not of any worthiness of myself. And read back that Galatians 1 section and compare and contrast. It is the same ideas being evoked right there. Hallelujah. Yeah, and all that. Okay. So yeah, that was my mission plaque scripture. It just vibed with me. Story of Paul is kind of cool, and when Alma the Younger does it, it's also kind of cool. I do like this story. Like it's clearly. Okay. So again, continue with Alma here in 36. For I went about with the sons of Mosiah, seeking to destroy the church of God, but behold, God sent his holy angel to stop us by the way. This lines up, right? And behold, he spake unto us as were the voice of thunder, and the whole earth trembled beneath our feet, and we all fell to the earth, for the fear of the Lord came upon us. The voice of the angel said unto me, Arise. And I arose and stood up and beheld the angel. And he said unto me, If thou wilt of thyself be destroyed, seek no more to destroy the church of God.
Wow.
Okay, where is that? In verse verse 9. So in Mosiah 27, the angel never says that. The angel says a lot. I read everything the angel says.
Yeah.
The angel says, Arise, stand forth. Why persecutest thou the church of God? This is my church. I will establish it. Nothing shall overthrow it, save it is the transgression of my people. The angel continues on. Behold, the Lord hath heard the prayers. And he's talking about all the prayers he's heard. For this purpose, I come to convince thee of the power and authority of God, that the prayers of the servants might be answered. Can you dispute the power of God? Does my voice not shake the earth? Can you not behold, I am sent from God? going
Right.
into captivity, and the land of Nephi stuff, and all that was done for them. They were in bondage. He's delivered them. Go thy way, and seek to destroy the church no more. So this is probably where we're going to get as close as possible. So verse 7, thou wilt of thyself be destroyed. Seek no more to destroy the church of God. Seek to destroy the church no more, that their prayers would be answered, and this even if thou wilt of thyself be cast off.
Huh.
If thou wilt of thyself be destroyed, seek no more to destroy the church of God. It's not the same thing. Okay. Now, the reason why that is, telling or something is because it's not the same thing. There is a thematic similarity, and it fits incredibly well with the faults of human memory. Now, Alma the Younger could be subjected to the same thing, but so could Joseph Smith going through and trying to do this particular quote. It's an inconsistency in the story, right? If it were the only inconsistency, I would call this enough to, or not really enough to really, weigh one way or the other. But there's more.
Right.
There's more. But to get more, we need to go back to Mosiah 27. So we have Mosiah, or we read through 18 where they fell back to the earth. And they're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now, the astonishment of Alma was so great that he became dumb, that he could not open his mouth. He became weak, that he could not move his hands. And he was taken by those that were with him, and they carried him helpless, and even until he was laid before his father. They rehearsed unto his father all that had happened. His father rejoiced. Yay. For he knew that it was the power of God. Yeah.
Look, my kid's having a seizure. Yay! Buddy.
And he caused the multitude to be gathered together, that they witnessed what the Lord had done for his son, and also for those that were with him. He caused the priests to assemble themselves together to fast and to do some other stuff. And they do so. They immediately, I want to clarify, they immediately take Alma to Alma, and they drop Alma off at the feet of Alma. And Alma is super excited that Alma is passed out, and Alma fasts and prays. Sorry.
I was like, and then Alma high-fived Alma, and they both went.
Okay, but no, so they immediately take him over, right? This seems to be like pretty much immediate. There's no major lapsing of time or anything like that. They just immediately take him there. But now they're in this process of fasting and praying for 2 days and 2 nights, and the limbs of Alma received their strength. And he stood up and began to speak. And then he talks about, oh, how great and how wonderful this was, and I was racked in pain. And he actually uses a lot of verbiage that will show up again in Alma 36. And so, but I want to look at this 2 days and 2 nights thing real quick. Okay, remember that. Verse 10 of Alma 36, and it came to pass I fell to the earth, and it was for the space of 3 days and 3 nights that I could not open my mouth, neither had I use of my limbs. So who's right? Is it Mosiah 27 or is it Alma 36?
I was like, wait a minute. That is, one of these things is not like the others.
One of these things is not like the others. One of these is a much, So is it 2 days and 2 nights, or is it 3 days and 3 nights? Like, these are distinctly different.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair to Alma the Younger, Jesus is also wrong about how long he is going to be in the tomb for. So it's part of a proud tradition. And
wow.
Yeah, so there is that. There is, to his credit, that much. However, this is a contradiction. Now, again, I'm going through and dealing with all these Book of Mormon apologetics, and one of the lines of apologetics is to point out how the narrative is essentially free from error. And I do have to say, it is pretty incredible how in a lot of cases you can be like, I wonder where this particular thing is even coming from. You can go backwards and you can actually find the thing showing up again. It happens quite a bit in the Book of Mormon, so long as you're not going too far off in any one direction. Otherwise, those connections start to vanish. But in a lot of cases, like you can actually go back and find, oh yeah, this is what this was. We'll see it with the Order of the Nehors later on when they show up. It happens. But this is an error. right? Like this is
Yeah.
an
It
out and
just
out error.
straight up is.
And this is two accounts of the same thing. And I mean, I don't know what Mormon source is for Mosiah 27, but clearly in doing his abridging, where he has Alma 36 in front of him, that he's just going to put right directly into his work.
Yeah.
He doesn't, think, maybe with Mosiah, with this part that's going to be Mosiah 27, I need to keep those, or those should be consistent. Or is there an issue with the sources? He's not
Yeah.
being a very careful historian
Yeah.
in his work. Alternatively, this is, an oral production going over a certain amount of time, and
Yeah.
where, he uses 2 days and 2 nights over here. 3 days and 3 nights is what sticks in the brain a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And that's what gets manifest over in this direction, especially since we're going right back to Paul all over again. And Paul is talking about for a span of 3 days, he has his blindness.
Yeah.
Well, Paul doesn't mention that. The author of Luke Acts mentions that. And we're gonna loop back into Paul just about anywhere that we can with this, right?
I was gonna say, what a surprise.
Yeah. So yeah, there is a lot more to get into with Alma 36. Alma 36 it's interesting. I think it sets an interesting stage for how we can interpret some later passages.
Yeah.
That will be fun. It is also the longest chiastoid form in the Book of Mormon. It's the one that gets trotted out as like the example of like long intentional chiasmus in the Book of Mormon, and how did that get there. Alma 36 is awesome. I actually really do like that chapter overall. I think it is one of the more beautifully written ones. I do note that it has a lot of dependencies on the story of Paul, and all that. But it is a section or a chapter that I really do enjoy. I'm excited for actually getting to that. But what this does help to illustrate is just how similar, one, we have with Paul and Alma the Younger, but two, there are also some internal inconsistencies between those two accounts. Just there are internal inconsistencies with the accounts with Paul and the different conversion accounts there on his road to Damascus. Which in and of itself, I actually do find really interesting.
Right.
That manifests that way. Yeah. That is. Yeah. After that, we know that Alma the Younger goes on to become, this great preacher. And a lot of Pauline ideas appear in Alma's writings.
But I mean, we see that in Joseph's writings. I mean, Joseph's translations.
Yep. Paul is quoted. Yeah, Paul is
all
quoted quite a bit.
Yeah,
quite a
him
bit.
And Isaiah, like.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah. That was one of the other things too. Was going through and looking at some of these intertextual relationships, and Paul shows up in a bunch of places, and places he doesn't belong sometimes.
Oh, that Paul.
Yeah.
That's the Saul in him getting,
right. But like Ether 12:27 is just it's the thorn in the flesh from 2 Corinthians 12, right? Like the same ideas manifest. Like Paul is all over the place in the Book of Mormon, and this is one of the most plain examples of that. But I think it's kind of an interesting look too at how Joseph really understood the character of Paul and his role in Christianity, because of the role that Alma the Younger ends up playing and the way that his ministry ends up going forward. I think is really a reflection of Joseph's own understanding of the character of Paul. There are other things too that are going to happen, right? Paul goes into prison. He's in prison. I think it's with Silas, and they like bust down the prison walls. They like escape from that. We're going to see that later on in Alma's ministry as well. Like there are these other parallels that happen with between Paul and Alma, really just kind of throughout the narrative. And interesting stuff. It's
awesome.
Yeah. And it's like stuff that is like not necessarily Paul, that happens to like other people, those things don't necessarily happen to Alma. Like, there's the other story of like the angel appearing in the prison and shaking the walls of the prison. I think it's Peter, that happens to. And shakes the walls of the prison. The jailer comes in and he sees this face and it's this glorious angel and all that. And he's converted. Like, all this stuff happens like that. Well, that story gets repeated in Helaman, in its own way. And you're right. This isn't happening to Alma. Like, despite Alma the Younger being in prison and having similar experiences, his experiences reflect the experiences of Paul in prison, not the experiences of Peter and the others. Which I find this interesting. And I'm speaking a little bit off the cuff here, so I'm sure that there's, but yeah, like Paul and Alma the Younger, they're
I was gonna say, wow.
Yeah, wow.
Well, I guess it's so, seeing the scriptures, both Mormon and biblical, through a clear lens now, where I'm seeing it without those rose tinted LDS glasses, seeing things truly for what they are, for how they were written and who they were written by. Really, really eye-opening.
Yeah, it really is. For me, it has only made me love this stuff more. Like I especially for me, the Book of Mormon. I would say in my critical space, I have developed a love for the Book of Mormon that far surpasses anything that I ever had as a believer. That is with recognizing all of the issues with it. But I think that it's because I am able to take it for what it is, that has just allowed me to appreciate it and love it for what it is, instead of trying to make it into something that it isn't. And yeah, as in the critical space, and no longer accepting it as historical or anything authoritative or anything like that, just as this the creation of the mind of Joseph Smith, of this 19th century farm boy, trying to deal with these different ideas and these competing voices, and giving voice to his own experiences in that. I think that this is really is a remarkable text, but not in the way that that believers
want us to appreciate.
So somebody could now clip that out of me saying it really is a remarkable text.
It's wonderful.
Completely remove all that from context, and make it. I feel like that's how Book of Mormon Central is doing its How Great the Evidence thing, when they get different people on there to they get the non-Mormons on there to talk about stuff, and that's kind of how they're clipping it, and you see the full quotes in context, like, oh yeah, that's not at all what they're saying.
That is not what he just said, actually, but okay.
But for me it has become just, I've recognized the influence that it has had on me, the impact that it's had on me for good and for bad. I've recognized too, more and more, how it can help to really understand the mindset of what we were going into with early Mormonism. What was that starting point? What was that first vector that was going to point, and how did that develop? And while Doctrine and Covenants is interesting for some of that, I think that it's more performative. I think that with the Book of Mormon, Joseph was able to actually be more honest about where he was at, because this is somebody else. This is supposed to be somebody else's words, and they're not his. And so he doesn't. He can put himself outside of it, and that, I think, allows for a more honest look at where his mind really was and what he was really thinking about these things, and how he understood Christianity and all of that. And there, 1829 Joseph is not a remarkable Christian. He's not somebody, he's not innovative. He's not standing out in that space and creating these new theological paradigms or anything like that. He develops into that. He grows into somebody who starts to have a real impact on modern Christianity, within his own bubble, and even to some extent outside of it. But he's not developing ideas that are truly revolutionary.
Right.
Instead, he's giving voice to something that would have been understood in his milieu. It would have been understood at his time, trying to piece together ideas and all that to build up this narrative. And yeah, I think the Book of Mormon is absolutely remarkable for that.
Well,
But
and
yeah,
I don't think the fact that whether it is or isn't a historical document, that has no bearing on the good and the bad you can take from the book. I mean, it doesn't
right,
matter.
right, 100%, right. Like, I in Mosiah 4 with King Benjamin's injunction about how to treat the poor, like
Right.
I wish that was what was put up in classrooms. You
Me
know,
too.
like stop with the Ten
If
Commandments shit. Like, let's start putting up Mosiah 4
right. Like
because like
if
there's
oh, I'm sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, you were saying.
Well, I'm just like, they're the Christians, and this is not just a LDS issue. They the Christians tend to be the people who are the least familiar with their own writings,
Mhm.
and their own belief systems.
Right, right. And I used to think that we in the LDS tradition were better than that.
Mm,
I used to think that we had a better understanding of all that, and I honestly thought that as somebody, during my mission, I tended to have a better understanding than of the scriptures than just about any other missionary that was around. Like, there were others who definitely were like, my level above whatever.
right.
But against like the overall grain, like,
Oh,
put a
by
couple of us in the room,
far.
and I was going to be one of those that was running into that. I wasn't as good at other things by any stretch, but the scriptures was one of those areas that I could be pretty solid in.
Yeah.
I knew nothing. Like, I knew like the stuff that I have learned since.
Oh
I knew
man.
nothing. It's like this idea of putting like Alma and Paul together this way. Like, I knew it was there. I
Yeah.
understood that this was present there, but really understanding like a lot of like all of the context that leads into all
Yeah.
of that, nowhere close to really getting to grasping that. But
Oh, yeah, no
yeah,
way. And that's not just a Ute thing. That's across the board. We when stuff gets uncomfortable or the cracks start forming, I know for me, I felt I either have to dig in deeper or start facing those things. And I think for
hmm
the most part, facing those things are really super, super scary if all you've ever known, or for the better part of your life, what you've been exposed to is going to be the whitewashed version of Mormonism and all that comes with that.
right. And yeah, no, I get that. I get that. A while ago, I was sitting outside the bishop's office to have a little chat with the bishop,
Mm-hmm.
um, and there in one of the rooms behind me, there was a guy who was sitting down with somebody who's just about to go on their mission.
Wow.
And like, they had just gotten their mission call, or they were just getting ready to go, or something like that. And he was
Wow.
sitting down with them, and was talking about like just sharing like these faith promoting stories, right? Talking about like
Of course.
biblical scholarship ideas, archaeological finds, stuff like that, and trying to share it in a faith promoting way. And at that point in time, I knew a thing or two about this stuff, and
Right.
it took every
I was
ounce of
gonna
self control
say,
to not walk in there and just be like, everything that he just told you is wrong.
like,
And
how
like,
did you not? I don't know that I could have.
I took every ounce of self control, because yeah, I definitely didn't want to necessarily do the whole faith shaking. Like, I'm not interested in destroying people's faith.
Right.
I do want people to believe things for the right reason, and
Right.
I knew I wasn't in a place to handle that conversation with the grace and tact that would be necessary to not have
fair.
it be
That's
faith
fair. That's fair.
destroying, or or for it to not to come across that way. But yeah, it was
Yeah.
like everything that he just told you is just flat out wrong. Uh, don't repeat any of that to anybody you ever talk to, because it's
None of that.
yeah. I mean,
Everything he just said. Bye.
yeah. We were talking like high priest group level. Just
Oh.
yeah, it was bad. But yeah, no, but to like just be constrained by that, right? To be
Yeah.
constrained by having to fit everything into that paradigm is difficult. And I think that when you have a little bit more liberty to just take it for what it is and
Yeah.
say, yeah, no, this is the source for this, or I don't really know what the source is. Look at
Right.
Acts chapter 22. I have no idea where that came from.
Right.
I don't think it's original to the author of Luke Acts, but I also don't think it's original to Paul.
No,
Like it's
when Paul's
I think that there's
cousin
some
was filling in.
I don't know. Like I don't know where that would have
Yeah.
originally come from. And that's fine. Like it's cool. But I do have a really good sense, I think, of where the story of
Yeah.
Alma the Younger comes from. I think that, I think we've made the case pretty clear that this is where the words come from, Dr.
Yeah.
Hales. And anesthesiologist, I believe, is what he's an MD, not a PhD. Anyway, yeah. But yeah, that's where the words come from, Dr. Hales. Like,
Yeah.
I think we can do that. I think we can do that with every section here, ultimately. Like, if you wanted to, with
Oh.
the Book of Mormon,
Yeah.
where do the words come from? I think if we really look, we might be able to find just about, okay, well, it's going to come from here or there.
Right.
And for me, is a lot of times the limiting factor is I just don't have that much time to dive through every single line of the Bible to find. Sometimes the Bruce R. McConkie with his footnotes was very helpful. Sometimes it'd be like, yeah, no, this cross reference is right here. I'm like, oh yeah, like there's that. That's because that's a literary dependency. That's why that's right there.
Yeah.
And then in other places, it could be a little bit more complicated than that. His footnotes may not be as good.
They let's pitch in the right direction.
So sometimes not even that, because sometimes he's just like, it just goes over to Doctrine and Covenants. Like, oh, that's useless to me. It's not what I'm dealing with right now. Doctrine and Covenants, that's a whole other thing.
That's a different year. Right now,
Yeah.
what we're working on is,
yeah, I think it's a lot harder to find where the words come from Doctrine and Covenants than it is from the Book of Mormon.
Oh, big time. Agreed.
Like, I think Joseph is pulling from a lot of other sources that just are either lost to history or, and there may be some extent to that as well with some of the stuff that Joseph does in the Book of Mormon.
Right.
It's like, well, I mean, this, like, King Benjamin's sermon looks a lot like a 19th century Protestant sermon. That's probably where it comes from.
Oh, no doubt.
But which sermon, when, where can we like recall?
There's.
I don't think we're gonna be able to do that. But this looks so much like a 19th century Protestant sermon that's
right.
That seems to be where the words came from there. So
yeah.
Anyway,
agreed.
Yeah, that's I think what we get from this is Alma the Younger. It's awesome. It's great. We're gonna come back to this conversion story when we get to Alma 36 a bit, but we're not gonna touch it on this level. We're gonna look at that from some other perspectives. And we'll look at it too from the perspective of taking apart Alma 39 and how that's been used and abused by the LDS faith.
Very.
Yep. But next time we're gonna get into the ministry of Alma the Younger. It's gonna be great. We're gonna go to the land of Gideon.
Love it.
All right.
This was a fun one. I had a lot of fun tonight.
Yeah, I love any chance that we get to really get into some at least touching into biblical scholarship.
Yeah.
Which slowed down a little bit after we got out of the Isaiah chapters. So
I liked getting back to that today. It was nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll catch you next time. And we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.